happy to be joined with Greg McKee, CEO of Tryp Therapeutics. Greg, great to have you back on. How are things?
Chad, great to be here, man. Yeah, terrific. Yeah, good to see you again.
Weather looks, obviously, the sun's coming in. How's beautiful? You're still in San Diego or La Jolla, correct?
That's right. Yeah, still in La Jolla. Yeah, finally, we're kind of pushing through the May gray and June gloom. We're finally getting a little bit of our normal, typical weather back, which is nice.
There's gloom in San Diego. Should I believe you?
You need to believe me. Yeah, believe me. Yeah, May and June are 2 months you do not want to be here. The rest of the year is beautiful, but those 2 months are a little bit challenging. Yes.
Your Padres looks like they might be in the World Series contention this year. Exciting times for the city, I would think.
Could be pretty awesome if that happens. Yeah, definitely looking forward to that.
It's great to have you back on. I want to begin concerning your psilocybin for neuropsychiatric disorder program. You recently announced 2 new partnerships with contract research organization Alchemy Corporation and ClinLogic. So before we begin as to why this made sense for your company, let's first find out a little bit about these 2 companies and who they are, and most importantly, how they will advance the overall growth within your company.
Yeah, for sure. So both those organizations are really important for us. So first of all, with Alchemy, they're our downstream fill finish organization. So they're a contract research organization that will do the work of taking the API, or the active pharmaceutical ingredient, and they'll formulate that. They'll do the final fill and finish to create our drug product. So that's really critical for us and for this industry, because a lot of the innovation that's going to take place is all, and the IP that will be generated is all around that. It's all around the excipients. It's all around the route of delivery. It's all around managing dosing appropriately, and all that takes place within the framework of the manufacturing context. So our 2 big players there are AMRI, and then now we've added Alchemy as a second piece, which is critical for that.
That's big. So as you said, the ClinLogics agreement, it'll focus on supporting your upcoming phase 2 clinical trials for eating disorders and fibromyalgia. So let's focus on timelines. Do your timelines remain on track with filing your IND applications with the FDA later this year and in the first quarter of 2022? And if so, why is this important for your shareholders?
Yeah. So ClinLogics is another important service provider of ours. They're a contract research organization that will help manage a lot of the process around getting the IND filed. They also house the medical writers that help us, take these brilliant ideas from our scientists and put them to paper and get ready to file with the FDA and other agencies that we need to get approval for. We are on track to file our first IND related to the eating disorders study with the University of Florida. We expect to be doing that here almost imminently. That will happen in the next couple of months, we expect, and we'll have some more details about that relatively soon. We've got, as we've said, we expect to have a minimum of 2 phase 2A studies up and running this year. At the University of Florida, we expect will be the first. The second, we anticipate, will be with another major institution that's based in the Midwest around a second indication that we'll be talking about very, very soon. But yes, we're on track to get that filed. And we think that's a major step forward for us and for our shareholders as we actually get prepared to get in the clinic and begin to dose patients in these very important disease areas.
There's a lot of attention that's been circulating around this industry. Walk me through, you're speaking to the FDA probably regularly. What's some of the feedback that they're receiving as there starts to be more attention and more research involved within the research that you're doing? Not only specifically you, but a lot of companies within the actual space itself.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I think that, we are at a point where we will be speaking with the agency, relatively often. There's certainly a lot of other conversations going on in the industry, broadly, and a lot of other information that's sort of like coming forward. I think that for sure, as an industry, there's a couple things happening. One, that more and more companies are getting, closer to actually clinical studies, which is a really great next step for everybody. I think, one of the things that we've been excited, we talked about in the past, is that we're working in disease areas that frankly, very few other people are. There's a lot of work being done in PTSD and depression. We're very excited about these other areas, specifically chronic pain and also in eating disorders. I think that's a big push as well. I would also anticipate that as we begin to, see more generated, data that's being published, for example, like the Robin Carhart-Harris data that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine just recently, that will garner more attention. There's some big names that have been looking at that. And I think that as we see big publications like that come out with significant numbers of patients in well-run studies, I think that's going to create a lot more credence and give more credence to this particular, chemistry broadly in the industry.
Yeah, and obviously with an advisor like Dr. Robin Carhart-Harris, he was named 100 most of influential people this year in Time Magazine, and a lot of announcements, as I said, including back on May 14th, a large study involving just under 86,000 people in the UK revealed that a higher degree of inflammation in the body is linked with a higher risk of depression. First off, I wanted to ask what your thoughts were pertaining to that announcement, and do you view this research as validating your efforts to target fibromyalgia, knowing that it's an inflammatory disease?
Sure. You know, we've had some interesting conversations with a few other collaborators around that very specific issue, not specifically tied to depression, but in relation to another disease, area. And it's intriguing to look at what inflammation, does on a number of different levels, and potentially what psychedelics may do, in that realm as well. It's really early days for us to make any comments on that yet. And obviously our focus is to really look at utilizing the effects of psilocybin and other chemistries potentially in this space to rewire the brain and get patients to, get out of those other ruts they've been in, around certain diseases. But there may be other follow-on effects like, potential implications around inflammation. We just don't know yet. But certainly we're excited, for the industry broadly and for academics that are working in this space to shed more light on potential applications in those areas.
It's great. I have to ask, where do you compare this whole industry and what you've learned? You've had an extensive background in big pharma. What have you learned, and what's the comparisons, I guess, with the two industries, and how do they separate as well?
Right. So I think as I said before, one of the exciting things about this particular area in drug development is there's just so much history, right? And so much research and effort that's put in the past to really develop this on an ongoing basis. And there's a significant safety data set. There's significant evidence of activity in a number of different indications. I think all that is very, very positive. I think that one of the things that I was reminded of recently is that this does sort of go through cycles, but I do believe that we're on the cusp of a really, groundbreaking trend in this space to bring some really novel chemistries to patients that frankly have a deep track record and a deep and a high probability of success. So very excited about that. There's very few other,
isn't it?
Yeah, it's really encouraging on many different levels, right? And mostly for patients, right, who are in these diseases like fibromyalgia and like binge eating and like hypothalamic obesity. These areas are really key. And I've spoken to many physicians who are really begging the industry to come up with treatment regimens, right? Because they just don't know, how else to help these patients. They're a little bit of a loss what to do. So I think that we're really on the cusp of some really terrific things for patients and to create, frankly, a better toolkit for physicians to work with as well.
I've asked this question before with some of the guests from Tryp that were on before, including Jim Gilligan. How big of a concern is this right now in America, and for that matter, the world, knowing that, when you focus on eating disorders, I learned a lot actually in my last interview with him about what they go through on a daily basis, a lot of stuff that I was unaware of. But I'd like to ask you, specifically, like how much of it is, I guess, a concern amongst the, American culture, so to speak, and what people go through on a day-to-day basis.
Right. Well, I think very significant, right? In short, the stories I think that Jim probably relayed that I've heard from Jennifer Miller as well, about patients that, just like they'll bust into a 7-Eleven and frankly, just mow their way through a whole shelf of potato chips or whatever sort of there that they've got access to, right? It's just pretty daunting, right? Or parents who are just so frustrated and concerned for the safety of their children that they've got to, keep them, housed in a confined space because they're concerned that they're just going to eat themselves to oblivion, right? It's a really big, big challenge. And I think that we're going to discover that there's a lot of unmet need that hasn't been diagnosed, effectively. And, based on the conversations I've had with Jennifer and other physicians in a number of different, in chronic pain as well, frankly, where there's just, patients are constantly coming back to them without any particular, good solution. And the physicians are really frustrated with this and would like to have some other, better tool in their toolkit to be able to treat, patients with. So I think that I think that the problem is probably larger than we've anticipated. And that's certainly something I've seen before in other disease areas where you just sort of you just start at the beginning a little bit. And then as you spend more time, that wedge just opens up more and more as there's greater awareness and better diagnostic tools. And frankly, when there's tools to treat these patients, they sort of come out of the woodwork, so to speak. So I think that's a bit of a trend that we've seen before and that could likely happen here. And for sure, there's already, handfuls of physicians that we've talked to that have patient populations that they're trying to serve that with with not really much, to do for them at the moment. So I do think it's a big issue here in the States. I think that as we begin to, look at other markets, other countries, that we'll find similar trends as well.
You've touched on awareness. You've touched on how we're on the cusp of something as far as the overall growth of the industry. Couple of endorsements, obviously, Dr. Robin Carhart-Harris with the report last month from the New England Journal of Medicine. NIH Director Francis Collins recently appeared to endorse the potential of psychedelics by saying there's been potentially promising peer-reviewed clinical research. Saying all this, and we have talked about the momentum that's building, where do you see this industry and the growth potential, let's say, over the next 12 months?
Yeah. So I think one of the next interesting steps, right, is going to be, two things. One is that, well, maybe three things. One, more companies are going to be going into clinical studies. Second of all, we'll begin to see data emerging from these trials over the next 12, 18, 24 months. That's going to be the real proof in the pudding. And then I think that what will come from that is likely interest from big pharma. That's one of the next steps. I'm really curious to kind of see when that evolves. So specifically, when will, large pharmaceutical companies like a Lilly or Roche or Sanofi, AbbVie or others actually, begin to partner with, early younger stage biotech companies like Tryp to develop these compounds, commercially and globally. That I think is those two things, more clinical data from these studies that are underway right now. And then second of all, when big pharma kind of moves in to cut these traditional biotech, big pharma partnerships where pharma will take these drugs forward to market. That I think is really a couple big steps for us the next,
for sure.
12, 18 months.
You got Pharma on one side, you also had legislative, and I wanted to ask you finally, your home state, California, obviously being a trailblazer, it seems like in a lot of these new emerging industries. The California Senate last week passed a bill to legalize the possession of psilocybin and certain psychedelics. Although it doesn't have a direct impact on your company as a pharmaceutical-based research company, do you expect any indirect benefits, such as maybe relaxed marketing abilities, should the bill pass in your home state?
Well, there's actually something even more fundamental than that. So one of the things, as you appropriately said, as a pharmaceutical drug development focused, entity, we've got to get state DEA approval to use these chemistry in humans, right? So a couple of different, all the academic collaborators that we're working with have to go through state approval. What I anticipate is that because of the state Senate in California's move recently, that potentially could make those approvals much easier. Right now, it takes about 6 months or so for that state approval to happen before we get federal, approval by the DEA to use these chemistries, right? So I think that the obvious benefit is that we could potentially move into the clinic more rapidly with greater access, obviously under controlled settings. But I think this relaxation in the legislative regulations is a big step forward overall for the industry.
Yeah, it's great all the way around. Listen, I know you're busy. Appreciate you taking the time to check in with us, and let's keep in touch, but we appreciate the update.
Chad, great to see you, and thanks for your thoughtful questions as always.
You're welcome. Appreciate it, Greg. Stay in touch.